So, here's the thing. My family, they really know how to make you feel like an afterthought. My sister, Vanessa, got flown out to London for her birthday, and my parents bought her this ridiculously expensive $7,000 watch. Meanwhile, I was left with a half-eaten fridge cake for mine. No phone call, no card, nothing. I didn't cry or scream, though. I just took a step back, and, well, let me tell you, it wasn't long before I decided to take some serious action. But before we dive into that wild story, there's a quick announcement. Due to some technical hiccups, we're moving to a new channel. Make sure you subscribe to Kin and Karma, check the description, the pinned comment, or the collab tag right here. You won't want to miss what's coming next, so there I was. Lying in my bed, barely able to breathe, feeling like my chest was on fire. And honestly, I didn't even care about the fever anymore. I was 32 years old that day, and my birthday was turning out to be, well, let's just say not what I expected. I could hear the rain hammering against the window. The only sound in the apartment, aside from my shallow breaths. I hadn't been able to shake the stress-induced pneumonia I'd been battling for the last 2 weeks. Because, of course, I was working 80-hour weeks, trying to sort out the mess my parents had made of their taxes. I was exhausted. But that wasn't the worst part. No. The worst part was that as I lay there, I felt completely invisible to my family. My own parents had forgotten my birthday. Can you imagine that a birthday and no one even bothered to acknowledge it? Not a phone call, not a card, nothing. Just nothing. And the kicker, my mom, Helen, sent me a text saying, "Happy late birthday, cake is in your fridge, dropped it off on Tuesday." I mean, I didn't even get a phone call. A group text. That was my birthday greeting. I didn't get a, "How are you?" or "I hope you feel better soon," or even a, "We love you." It was a generic, happy late birthday. Like I was some kind of afterthought. As if my birthday didn't matter. And my existence didn't matter either. That was the moment. The moment when everything shifted in my head. I wasn't just a little hurt. I wasn't even just disappointed. No, I felt something much deeper. I felt like I was nothing. Like I was just there to hold things together for them while they went off and lived their perfect lives. And here I was, on my own birthday, laying in bed sick, all alone. And it hit me that was all I'd ever been to them. A shield, the responsible one, the fixer. I had spent my entire adult life doing everything for them, taking care of all their messes, managing their finances, covering for their bad decisions. I was the accountant, the grown-up, the one who took care of things. And what did I get in return? A fridge cake, a half-eaten, generic store-bought cake. I couldn't even cry about it. The tears wouldn't come. It was like my body had run out of tears for this whole thing. Instead, I felt this numb, cold clarity, like I was seeing everything for what it truly was for the first time. It wasn't just about the lack of a birthday celebration. No, it was everything. The constant sacrifices I made for them, the sleepless nights, the stress of holding everything together. All of it had led to this moment. This moment where I realized they didn't care about me at all. And it wasn't just that they didn't care about me. They didn't even notice that I was invisible to them. I was a ghost in my own family. I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from the fever. No, it was the feeling of anger building up inside me, boiling beneath the surface. I pulled up Vanessa's social media, you know, just to see how things were going for her. My younger sister, who always seemed to have everything handed to her. The golden child. I don't know why I tortured myself by looking, but I did. Her profile was just perfect. Every photo was a glossy, curated shot of luxury and happiness. It was like watching an ad for a high-end brand, except it was her life. There was a post about her birthday celebrations, too. A picture of a diamond-encrusted watch inside a velvet box, sitting on a white tablecloth at a fancy restaurant in Mayfair, London. The caption was so over the top. Early 29th birthday surprises from mom and dad. They flew me to London for a gala. Blessed family love. She was living the dream. She was the center of attention, the one who always got the love, the gifts, the recognition. And me, I was stuck here in my apartment with a fridge cake, barely able to breathe, forgotten. My parents had just spent thousands on Vanessa. They had flown her to London, thrown her a lavish birthday celebration, and bought her a $7,000 watch. A watch I knew all too well because, as the trustee of the family's estate, I was the one who approved the emergency line of credit they claimed was for home repairs. It wasn't for home repairs, though. It was for their little girl's luxury birthday present. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved my phone aside and forced myself to get out of bed. The room spun as I stood up, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I wrapped myself in a heavy blanket and shuffled down the hallway toward the kitchen, hoping the cold air would somehow shake off the anger brewing inside me. I opened the fridge. The light was harsh, and the shelves were mostly empty. Sitting there on the middle rack, next to a carton of expired milk, was the cake. The cake, the one my mom had left for me. It wasn't even a whole cake. It was a half-eaten, store-bought thing. The icing was smeared and 3 slices were missing. It was the same cake my mom had brought over on Tuesday when she'd stopped by to complain about her luggage being too small for her London trip. She had eaten a quarter of it while sitting at my counter, and then left the rest behind for me to deal with. I stared at it, frozen in place. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was it. This was my worth to my family. A half-eaten cake in the fridge. The physical manifestation of how little they thought of me. How much they took me for granted, how much they used me. And still, I didn't cry. The tears just wouldn't come. I should have been crying, but all I felt was this cold, steady rage rising in my chest. I closed the fridge door, and in that moment, I made a decision. A decision I didn't know I was capable of making. I was done. Done being their fixer. Done being their shield, done sacrificing my peace, my health, my life for them. I'd spent years keeping them afloat, and what did I get in return? A fridge cake, a reminder that no matter how much I did, I would never be enough. I turned around, walked back into the living room, and collapsed onto the couch. But the silence in the apartment didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't the silence of someone who's sick. It was the silence of someone who had just had enough. The silence of someone who was finally awake. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay. And that's when it hit me. The financial chaos, the manipulation, the lies. It was all tied together. I'd been managing their money for years, cleaning up their messes, but they had never cared about me. They cared about what I could do for them. But now, They had crossed the line. They had crossed a line I would never let them cross again. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at that half-eaten cake, feeling the weight of everything that had just hit me. My entire life. I had been there for my family, but here I was, spending my 32nd birthday sick, alone, and completely forgotten. It felt like I was invisible to them, a shadow, just a background player in their little family drama. Meanwhile, my sister, Vanessa, was living a completely different reality. Her life was like something out of a glossy magazine, one of those perfect family stories that everyone would envy from the outside. I mean, I knew what was going on in her life, but the stark contrast between our worlds really hit me when I saw the pictures online, the ones that made me want to throw my phone across the room. Vanessa's birthday was nothing like mine. Oh no. Hers was a full-blown spectacle. There she was, smiling in front of a Michelin-starred restaurant in Mayfair, London, with a gleaming diamond-encrusted watch sitting inside a velvet box on the table. The caption was a bit much. Early 29th birthday surprises from Mom and Dad. They flew me to London for a gala. Blessed family love. A gala. Right, Vanessa was living a dream life, like some kind of celebrity, and the whole world knew about it. And I was lying in bed, unable to breathe, alone. But it wasn't just the trip that got to me. It wasn't even just the watch. It was everything. That $7,000 watch. It was something I knew very well because, as the trustee of the family estate, I had personally authorized the emergency line of credit for home repairs. Repairs, mind you, that never happened. Instead, the money had been used to buy a luxury watch for my sister. Something that was probably worth more than my entire savings. A watch that, I might add, was completely unnecessary. But it wasn't about the watch. Not really. It was about everything that came with it. The trip to London, the luxury accommodations, the fancy dinners at exclusive restaurants. The fact that my sister, who had done nothing to earn any of this, was getting all of this while I was left behind. It was the casualness of it all. They didn't even bother to consider my feelings, let alone remember my birthday. To them, I was just someone who existed in the background, someone who wasn't really important. I remember scrolling through Vanessa's social media, seeing all the pictures of her trip, the happy captions, the designer outfits, the smiles, and I felt like a fool. How could they do this to me? I had spent my entire life making sure they had everything they wanted, covering for their financial mistakes, dealing with their endless demands. I sacrificed everything, my time, my peace, my own career goals, just to keep things running smoothly for them. And what did I get in return? A cake from the grocery store, left half-eaten in the fridge, and a text message that was more of a reminder of my invisibility than anything else. I remember feeling like my chest was going to cave in. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I just sat there in my kitchen, cold and empty. I felt this deep, hollow ache inside, like they had ripped out every part of me that had ever hoped for a little recognition, a little love, a little appreciation. I wasn't just their accountant or their fixer anymore. I was nothing. They had forgotten about me completely. I mean, how could they not? I thought about all the things they'd done for Vanessa, all the money they'd poured into her, all the attention they'd lavished on her. I remembered the last few years when they'd talked about her struggling with her influencer career, how they'd made excuses for her when she couldn't seem to keep a job or build any real success. They gave her everything: the trips, the gifts, the attention, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I wasn't even upset about Vanessa's success. Not really. I mean, she had done what she could with what she had. But the way my parents had gone out of their way to cater to her every whim, while I was the one who was always there to make sure they didn't drown in their own mistakes, just hurt. It wasn't just that they had spent all this money on her. It was that they had spent it without thinking about me, without considering how I might feel. It was like I didn't even matter to them, to my own parents. And it wasn't just that I didn't get a birthday gift, or a phone call, or a card. It was that I had been taken for granted for years. For decades, probably. I mean, think about it. I was the one who always stepped up, the one who kept them afloat, the one who dealt with their bad investments, their financial chaos, their endless demands. And what did I get? Nothing. Not even a simple acknowledgement that I was still here. But Vanessa got everything. She got the watch, she got the trip, she got the love, and I got a fridge cake. I think that was the moment when everything clicked for me. The moment when I realized just how deeply I had been overlooked. That cake in my fridge, that half-eaten thing left behind by my mother, was the physical representation of how little I meant to them. It wasn't just about the cake. It was about how they had treated me my whole life. It was about how they had always taken me for granted. And that was when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to stay quiet and keep letting them walk all over me. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my own happiness just to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I wasn't going to keep being the invisible one. No, I was done. They thought they could forget about me. They thought they could make me the one who always cleaned up their messes while they went off and lived their perfect, shiny lives. But they were wrong. I was going to make sure they never forgot me again. And it started with this. With me standing up for myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one to clean up their mess. I wasn't going to be the one who made everything better. They would have to face the consequences of their actions. All of them. And as for the cake, well, that was just a symbol of everything they had taken from me. It wasn't about the cake. It was about everything it represented: the years of sacrifice, the years of being the one who always gave and never got anything in return. But that was going to change. They had crossed the line, and I was done being their doormat. The anger from that morning hadn't faded. It only simmered, bubbling up under the surface as I sat there, alone in my apartment, staring at the half-eaten cake in the fridge. That cake had somehow become a symbol of everything wrong with my relationship with my family. But it wasn't just the cake. It was the fact that my family, the people who were supposed to love me, the people I'd always protected, had completely forgotten about me. It was as though I didn't even exist. But I couldn't focus on that for long, not with everything else going on in my life. I was still battling this damn pneumonia that had completely wrecked me. The fever was relentless, and my chest felt like it was on fire with every breath. But I pushed it all aside, and I had to do something. I couldn't sit back anymore and just take it. I couldn't ignore the way my family had been treating me for years. I couldn't ignore the financial mess they had created, And I couldn't ignore the fact that they were slowly draining everything they had left. The problem wasn't just the neglect. It wasn't just the emotional distance they had created between us. No, it went deeper than that. It was the money, the trust, the lies, the fraud. And I didn't realize the extent of it until I took a closer look at the financial documents that had been in my possession for years. They had been so careless with money, so reckless, and I'd been the one to clean it all up. I had been the one to ensure the bills were paid, the loans were taken care of, the investments kept afloat. I was the one who had managed everything. But as I pulled out the trust documents, I felt this gnawing sense of dread. I had always been the one to protect the family's legacy, but it was starting to feel like everything I had done was a lie. The more I stared at the documents, the more I realized just how deep the rot went. They were bleeding money. My parents, Vanessa, even Julian, especially Julian, had been draining everything they could. And it was all done under my nose. I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on making sure they had what they wanted, that I had completely ignored the warning signs. There it was, right in front of me, the $7,000 charge for that ridiculous watch. A watch I knew all too well because, as the trustee of the family estate, I had signed off on the emergency credit line for repairs on the house. But that's not what the money had been spent on. No, it had gone toward luxury items, extravagant trips, and unnecessary expenses that had nothing to do with the house or any kind of emergency repairs. I had seen the line item for the watch before, but I had assumed it was a mistake. I wanted to believe that it wasn't real, that my family wouldn't be so reckless with money. But there it was, plain as day. A charge to a luxury jeweler in Mayfair, London, $7,000. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. It wasn't just the watch. It wasn't just the trip to London. It was everything. They were spending money like it was nothing, draining accounts they had no business touching. I thought about the emergency credit line they had convinced me to approve, something that was supposed to cover essential repairs for their estate, and how it had been siphoned off for non-essential luxuries. And then I thought about the other expenses, the first-class flights, the $22,000 spent on a suite at a luxury hotel, the dinners at exclusive restaurants, the high-end boutiques. I felt a sick knot twist in my stomach as I scrolled through the transactions. But it wasn't just the spending that shook me. It was the fact that I had been the one to approve the loan. I had trusted them. I had believed them when they said it was for home repairs. And all along, they'd been lying to me. They'd been lying to my face, using me to clean up their messes, to make sure no one knew how bad things had gotten. They had been living a lie, and I had been too blind to see it. The truth hit me hard. The overwhelming weight of the betrayal left me feeling like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was fraud. My parents had been taking money from the family trust, using it for their own personal gain. And worse still, they had been manipulating me, convincing me that it was all for the good of the family. But in reality, they had been using me as a shield. They had been using me to cover up their own financial mismanagement. And it wasn't just my parents. No. Julian was in on it too. Vanessa's fiancé. The smooth-talking, well-dressed man who had wormed his way into their lives, convincing them that he was some kind of venture capitalist. But I knew better. I had always known something was off about him. He had been too charming, too polished, too perfect. He had made his way into my family's good graces with ease, and I had always thought it was because he was smart, or maybe just really good at playing the part. But now I saw him for what he really was, a con artist. Julian had been behind all of this. He was the one who had suggested the home repair loan. He was the one who had planned the trip to London. He was the one who had manipulated my parents into thinking they were entitled to all of this. And now, he was bleeding the family trust dry. He had convinced them to wire $45,000 to his so-called investment firm. A firm that, as I discovered, didn't even exist. Aegis Vanguard Ventures was nothing more than a shell company, a front for his fraudulent activities. He was using my family's wealth to fund his own lifestyle, all while convincing them they were untouchable, that they could get away with whatever they wanted. And the worst part, I had let it happen. I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, that I hadn't seen the signs. I hadn't seen how deep the manipulation went. I hadn't realized how far they had gone to deceive me. I sat there in my office, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I felt the anger welling up inside me, bubbling over, threatening to consume me. But I didn't act on it immediately. No. I had to be strategic. I had to be smart. I had to think this through. I was the one in control. I was the trustee of the family estate. It was my job to protect the legacy my grandmother had left behind. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to fix this. I was going to make sure my family faced the consequences for what they had done. The first thing I did was freeze the accounts. Every single one of them. I revoked the authorization on the emergency credit line. I canceled the credit cards they had been using to charge their luxury items. I suspended the automatic monthly allowances. I locked down every single asset that wasn't directly tied to the property taxes or basic utilities. I wasn't messing around, but I wasn't done yet. No. I had one more thing to take care of. I needed to get proof of what had been going on. I needed to prove that Julian was behind it all. And that's when I called Marcus. Marcus Vance was a private investigator, a man I had worked with before on a complicated estate settlement. I trusted him. I knew he could get the information I needed. And I didn't waste any time. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, even though my insides were still reeling. "I need you to run a deep forensic background check on a man named Julian Sterling. I believe he's actively defrauding my family's trust." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him tapping away at his keyboard as he pulled up the information. "Julian Sterling," he repeated, his voice calm. "Got it. What do you need?" I need everything," I said, my voice flat. "I need to know exactly who he is, who he's working with, and how he's been draining the trust. He's been manipulating my parents into thinking they're entitled to all of this. I need you to dig into his LLC, Aegis Vanguard Ventures. I need irrefutable proof that he's been funneling money through that shell company." "You got it," Marcus replied. "Give me everything you have, and I'll get to work." I gave him the information he needed, the dates of birth, the known addresses, the LLC names. "I don't care what it costs. Marcus," I told him, "just get me the truth. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of everything I had just uncovered. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It wasn't even just the betrayal. It was the fact that I had trusted them. I had trusted my family, and they had used me. But now, I had the power. Now, I was going to make sure they faced the consequences. I had always been skeptical of Julian. From the moment he entered our lives, there was something about him that didn't sit right. He wasn't like the other men who came and went through Vanessa's life. Julian was polished, smooth, and charming in a way that made it hard to place my finger on what was wrong. He had this way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room, like he was genuinely interested in you, like he truly cared. But underneath all that charm, there was something darker, something manipulative. And yet, at the time, I didn't see it. I was so focused on holding my family together, on trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, that I overlooked him. But as I looked back, I realized that Julian wasn't just a man who had won Vanessa's heart. He was a man who had very deliberately worked his way into the heart of my entire family. And it wasn't because of his good qualities. No, it was because of what he wanted from them, from me. It wasn't long before I began to see just how much influence he had over them. The way my parents suddenly seemed to defer to him. The way he could manipulate them with a few well-placed words. He was a master at playing the game. At first, I thought maybe he was just trying to fit in, trying to impress my parents. After all, they were a big deal in their circles, always making sure their image was perfect, always chasing the next opportunity to flaunt their wealth. But Julian was different. He didn't care about appearances. He didn't care about impressing my parents the way others did. No. He was playing a much bigger game. He was in it for the money. And more than that, he was in it for control. I'd been the one running the financial side of things for years. I'd been the one keeping everything afloat, managing the trust, making sure the bills were paid, the loans were handled, the investments were monitored. But somewhere along the way, I had let my guard down. Somewhere along the way, Julian had wormed his way into their lives and started whispering in their ears. I didn't know how far it had gone until it was too late, until I started seeing the signs. It wasn't just the lavish gifts. It wasn't just the first-class flights and the luxury hotel suites. It was the way Julian had somehow convinced my parents to take out a loan for emergency repairs on their estate, a loan that they had somehow managed to drain for their own personal pleasures. And it wasn't just that. It was the way he had managed to make them believe they deserved all of it. The trips, the gifts, the luxury. He had gotten them so wrapped up in their own delusions that they didn't even see what he was doing. They didn't see how he was taking advantage of them. And the worst part, they didn't even realize how much control he had over them. I had always been the one they turned to. I had always been the responsible one. I was the one who held everything together, who kept the finances in check. But Julian was the one who had come in with his polished suits, his expensive cars, his charm. He was the one who convinced my parents that I was holding them back, that I was controlling the money out of jealousy or spite. He had painted me as the villain in this story. He had convinced them that I was the one who wasn't looking out for their best interests, that I was the one who was hoarding the family's wealth, when in reality, I was the one who was trying to protect it. And it wasn't just my parents who fell for his manipulation. Vanessa, too. She was completely under his spell. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. And now, Julian had made her his ally. He had convinced her that I was the one holding her back, the one who wasn't supporting her influencer career, the one who was too focused on the numbers and not enough on the big picture. I watched as she changed. She went from being my little sister, the one I had always protected, to someone who believed every word Julian told her. She started distancing herself from me, and I could see the way her affection for him grew while mine began to dwindle. And I understood. I did. Julian was good at what he did. He was playing them all like pawns, and I'd been the only one who could see the game he was playing. But I was too late to stop it. The first sign that things had gone wrong was when I approved that emergency line of credit. It was meant for essential repairs on my parents' estate, nothing more. My parents had convinced me that the roof needed urgent attention, that the house was falling apart and needed immediate fixing. They had insisted, and I had believed them. I had approved the loan, thinking I was doing the right thing. But then, when I started looking at the transactions, I saw what had actually happened. The money wasn't used for repairs. No, it had been spent on extravagant trips, on luxury shopping sprees, on things that had nothing to do with fixing the house. They had used it to fund their little fantasy world, one where they could pretend everything was perfect, one where they could live their lavish lives without any consequences. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what was going on, and I knew that Julian was the mastermind behind all of this. It wasn't just the money, either. It was the way he had so carefully positioned himself in their lives, the way he had taken my place as the one they trusted, the one they leaned on. Julian had made sure that no one saw the truth. He had made sure that my parents were so wrapped up in his lies, so caught up in the idea of their perfect life, that they couldn't see how badly they were being manipulated. And that's when I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Julian wasn't just trying to impress my family. He was trying to take over. He was trying to steal everything. I had been the one who was holding everything together for so long, and Julian knew that. He knew that I was the gatekeeper, the one who controlled the family's wealth. And he wanted it all. He wanted control of the trust. He wanted to be the one who made the decisions. And he was willing to do anything to make that happen. At first, I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen how deeply he was embedded in their lives, how much influence he had gained. But now, as I looked back, I realized that he had been behind every bad decision my parents had made. He had been the one whispering in their ears, convincing them that they were entitled to more, that they needed to live a bigger life, that they deserved all of this. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about power. Julian wanted to control everything, and he had found a way to do it. He had convinced my parents to go along with his schemes, to drain the family trust, to spend money they didn't have, all while convincing them they were making the right decisions. He had even convinced them to take out a loan under the guise of emergency repairs, knowing full well that it would be used for their own personal indulgences. He had manipulated them into believing that I was the one standing in their way, that I was the villain. He had painted me as the one who was keeping them from living their best lives, when in reality, I was the only one who had been looking out for them. And that's when I realized just how deep the betrayal went. Julian wasn't just a charming, smooth-talking fiancé. He wasn't just a guy who had fooled my sister. No, he was the puppet master, the one pulling all the strings behind the scenes, the one who had manipulated my entire family into doing his bidding. And now, I had to stop him. I had to expose him for what he was. I had to make sure that my family saw him for who he truly was: a con artist, a manipulator, a fraud. I was done sitting on the sidelines, done letting him control everything. I was going to take back control. I was going to make sure he paid for what he had done to my family. The anger that had simmered inside me, the fury that had been building ever since I saw that $7,000 watch, now solidified into something else. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was clarity. Cold, unrelenting clarity. I had been so blind for so long, so caught up in trying to fix everything for everyone else, that I hadn't seen the game they were playing. But now, I saw it all, and I knew exactly what I had to do. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to fix their problems. No. I was going to make sure they faced the consequences of their actions. The trust had been designed to protect the family's legacy, to ensure that future generations were cared for. But now, the only thing the trust was protecting was a pile of lies, and I was the one who had to tear it all down. The first thing I did was sit down at my desk in the office. I was trembling, but not from fear. No. I was trembling from the sheer weight of the decision I was about to make. For years, I had kept the family's finances in check, managing the estate, approving the loans, making sure everything was in order. But I wasn't in control anymore. Julian was. He had wormed his way into their lives, into their wallets. And I had let him, but not anymore. I wasn't going to let him continue draining the trust, using my family's money to fund his own little empire. I wasn't going to let him keep manipulating them, using their entitlement to get what he wanted. I was done. I opened my laptop, my hands steady despite the overwhelming rush of emotions swirling inside me. I logged into the master banking portal for the trust, the one I had accessed 1,000 times before. I'd always been the one who handled the trust's finances. I'd always been the one who kept everything running smoothly. But now, I was the one who was going to shut it all down. The screen loaded slowly, each account I'd been monitoring for years coming into view. The principal investment portfolios, the real estate holding accounts, the discretionary checking and credit lines I had set up for my parents, Vanessa, and even Julian. The system was set up to make sure everything was tracked, every penny accounted for. But now, as I looked at the screen, I felt a sense of cold attachment. This wasn't about helping them anymore. This was about taking back control. I clicked through the various accounts, each one more draining than the last. I saw the charges for the luxury items, the flights to London, the extravagant hotels, the shopping sprees. I saw the money that had been funneled into Julian's shell company, Aegis Vanguard Ventures, to fund his fake venture capitalist lifestyle. The moment I saw those transfers, everything snapped into place. I had been played, all of it. The loans, the repairs, the claims of emergency expenses, they had all been lies. They had all been designed to bleed the trust dry. I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let Julian think he could just take whatever he wanted. Use my parents' desperation to manipulate them and expect me to clean up the mess. It was time to take action, It was time to stop being the one who fixed everything and become the one who stopped it from happening. I started by freezing the accounts. The emergency line of credit, the one they had claimed was for repairs, gone. I revoked the authorization immediately. I canceled every credit card my parents and Vanessa held everything. They weren't going to be able to access a single cent without my say-so. Every transaction they had made, every luxury they had enjoyed, it all came to a screeching halt. It felt good, almost like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I wasn't done. I had to make sure they couldn't access the money at all. I had to make sure they faced the consequences of what they had done. I clicked through the discretionary accounts, the ones I had set up for their personal expenses. Arthur, Helen, Vanessa, they all had access to these accounts, and I had given them the freedom to use them as they saw fit. But now, I was taking that freedom away. I suspended every automatic monthly allowance. No more lavish dinners, no more luxury shopping, no more flights to London. It all stopped right then and there. I knew it would hurt them, but that was the point. They needed to feel the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to let them keep draining the trust. I wasn't going to let them keep living this delusion that they could have everything without paying the price. They needed to wake up. They needed to see the reality of what they had done. I sat back in my chair, the quiet hum of the computer filling the room. The accounts were locked. The money was frozen. There was nothing they could do. I had shut it all down, but I didn't feel victorious. No, I felt nothing. I felt empty. I had spent so many years trying to hold my family together, trying to keep them from falling apart, but in the end, I had been nothing more than a fool. They had used me. They had lied to me. They had drained the trust dry, and I had let them. But that was over now. It had to be. I wasn't going to keep being the one who cleaned up their messes. I wasn't going to keep letting them get away with murder, financially speaking. And so, I turned off my laptop and sat there in the silence of the room. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know how my parents would react, or what Vanessa would say when she found out. But it didn't matter. I had made my decision. I had taken control. I had stopped being passive. I had stopped letting them manipulate me. And I was done being the invisible daughter. Done being the one who had to fix everything. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I wasn't going to let them cross it again. The truth was, I didn't care what happened to them anymore. Not really. They had crossed a line that I couldn't come back from. They had betrayed me in the worst way possible. They had taken everything I had given them, and they had thrown it all away. But now, I was in charge, and it was time for them to face the consequences of their own actions. They had used me for far too long. Now, it was my turn to make sure they felt the weight of it. And they would. I would make sure of that. The next few days were filled with a quiet, steady anticipation. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken control. I had frozen the accounts, locked down the funds, and shut down their access to everything they thought they were entitled to. But I knew this wouldn't be over quickly. They wouldn't just let it go. They would come for me, and when they did, they would try to make me back down. I wasn't wrong. It came sooner than I expected. It was late in the afternoon when the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check the security camera to know who it was. I'd already seen the signs, the way they'd been texting me nonstop, trying to get me to unfreeze the accounts, trying to talk me down. They had clearly been planning something, and when I opened the door, there they were, my parents, looking like they'd been dragged through the mud. They were tired, haggard, and clearly desperate. But there was one person who wasn't supposed to be there. Julian. He stood next to Vanessa, his smug expression barely masking the tension in the room. "Luna, my father," Arthur said, his voice tinged with anger. "We need to talk." I looked past them at Julian, and my stomach churned. The man had a way of making everything feel like his business, like he had the right to be there. He was the one behind all of this. And now, here he was, standing in front of me like he owned the place. But I wasn't going to let him have control anymore. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me, or my family, any longer. "I'm listening," I said calmly, my voice steady. I wanted them to see how serious I was. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them talk me into reversing everything I'd done. Arthur stepped forward, his voice shaking with frustration. "You've made a terrible mistake, Luna," he said. "You're overreacting. We're your family. We love you. We're just asking you to fix it. Please, unfreeze the accounts." I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let their pleas move me this time. I had spent my entire life being the one to fix their messes. I had always been the one to save them from the consequences of their actions. But not anymore. Not this time. "I'm not fixing anything," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "You don't understand. This isn't about fixing anything. This is about stopping the damage." I turned to Julian, who had been standing there, saying nothing, watching the scene unfold with that calm, collected demeanor he always had. But I could see the unease creeping into his eyes. The jig was up. "You, Julian," I continued, "have been draining this family blind, using my parents, using Vanessa, using all of you for your own gain. You thought you could outsmart me, didn't you? Thought you could use my trust in this family to get what you wanted." Julian's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he was trying to keep his cool, trying to figure out what to do next. But I wasn't done. "You've been funneling money into your own shell company, Aegis Vanguard Ventures. You convinced my parents to take out a loan for emergency repairs that ended up funding luxury vacations and personal expenses. You've been manipulating them the entire time." There was a long pause. The silence between us grew thicker as the weight of my words sank in. My father looked like he had been slapped. His face was pale, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You're making accusations without any proof. This is insane." But it wasn't insane. It was the truth. The documents, the transactions, they were all there. All the proof I needed. "The proof is all in front of you." "Dad," I said, pulling out the folder from the drawer in my desk. I slammed it onto the table between us. The contents were simple transaction histories, the bank statements, the charges for the flights, the jewelry, and the wire transfers to Julian's fake company. "You think I don't know what's been going on? You think I didn't notice how much money has been disappearing? I've been tracking every single penny, every single expense. I know everything." My mother, Helen, looked like she was going to faint. She stepped forward, her hands shaking. "Luna, please," she said, her voice rising. "Don't do this. You're tearing the family apart. You can't just destroy everything like this. You're right, I said. I'm not destroying anything. You did that? My voice was cold now, sharper than it had ever been. It felt good to finally speak my truth. You're the ones who've been living in a fantasy. You've been using money that doesn't belong to you, pretending like you're living a life you can't afford, all while I've been the one holding everything together. I turned to Vanessa, who had been standing there silently, her face flushed with embarrassment and guilt. And you, Vanessa, I said, my voice softer now, but still firm. You've been played too. You've let him manipulate you, let him convince you that I was the problem. You've let him tear us apart. She flinched, looking down at the ground. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know he was doing this. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the conflict. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she wasn't entirely complicit in this. But the damage had already been done. You were so blinded by your own desires, I said, shaking my head. You were so wrapped up in your influencer life, in the fantasy Julian created, that you couldn't see what was happening to our family. But it's over now. I'm not going to let you or anyone else take advantage of me anymore. The room fell silent again, and I could feel the tension building. My parents were standing there, both looking at me like I was a stranger. Julian was still quiet, still trying to control the situation without saying a word. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the power now. The money is frozen, I said calmly, and it's staying that way. You're going to have to face the consequences of what you've done. No more loans, no more spending money we don't have. I'm done being the one to clean up your messes. I stood up, my eyes locking with Julian's. And as for you, I said, I'll make sure you pay for what you've done to this family. You're not getting away with it. Julian's eyes flickered with panic for the first time. He had been so confident, so sure of himself, but now he knew the game was up. There was no way out for him now. You can't do this, he said, his voice a low growl. I have connections. But I cut him off. You've already lost. Julian, I said, my voice icy. You're done. The family stood there in stunned silence, the weight of my words sinking in. They had no choice now but to accept the reality. They had been caught in their own lies, their own deceit, and there was no turning back. The days after everything went down were a blur. The tension in the house had been unbearable, but it wasn't just the tension with my family, it was the way everything had changed between us. My parents, once so secure in their wealth and their carefully constructed image, were suddenly faced with the harsh truth. They had no more credit cards, no more free rein to spend money they didn't have. And they were forced to reckon with the reality that they couldn't just go on pretending. The estate had to be sold, the luxury items returned. The image they had spent so long cultivating had crumbled in front of their eyes. It was almost poetic, in a way. All that grandeur, all those years of pretense had led to this inevitable fall. And it wasn't just their financial collapse. It was everything. The family, the trust, the fragile facade of our perfect life, it was all shattered. They had to move out of the estate they had struggled to maintain for so long, and with it, the life they had once clung to. My parents, once so full of arrogance, had been reduced to people I hardly recognized. It wasn't just about money, it was about their pride. Their pride had been the thing that kept them blind to everything around them. They had been so focused on appearances that they forgot the people who mattered. They had forgotten about me. And now, they were living in a small townhouse, far from the judgmental eyes of their old social circle. They had no more yachts, no more fancy trips, no more luxury cars. They were, in a way, forced to face the life they had built on lies and excess. I didn't feel sorry for them, not anymore. I had been the one to bear the brunt of their irresponsibility, their manipulation, their selfishness for so long. But now, they had to deal with it on their own. The hardest part, though, was Vanessa. She had been caught in the middle of all of this, and I knew it wasn't easy for her. The truth had come crashing down on her like a ton of bricks. She had spent years believing in a fantasy that Julian had created, and now that fantasy had shattered. But despite everything, I could see the change in her. I could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she started to take responsibility for her actions. It wasn't instant. It didn't happen overnight. But slowly, I began to see the old Vanessa, the one I had protected, the one who had been my little sister, start to come back. The superficial, self-absorbed girl who had only cared about Instagram likes and designer bags was gone. And in her place was someone who was beginning to understand the value of hard work, of responsibility, of standing on her own 2 feet. She wasn't perfect, and there were still times when I could see the old Vanessa trying to come back, but she was growing, learning from her mistakes. And for the first time, I saw the potential for her to be someone better than what she had been. That was the hardest part for me, watching her go through that, watching her deal with the fallout of Julian's lies and the family's implosion. But I didn't hold it against her. She had been manipulated. She had been naive, and she had learned. It wasn't my job to fix her anymore. Though, that was the thing I had learned. I couldn't fix everyone. I couldn't keep trying to save them. I had spent so many years trying to protect my family, trying to fix their mistakes, trying to shield them from the consequences of their actions. But in the end, I was the one who had to live with the damage. And that was what I had to stop doing. I had to stop protecting them, stop sacrificing my own peace for their mistakes. It wasn't just about saving the family legacy anymore. It was about saving myself. And I did. I saved myself. It wasn't easy, though. I had to rebuild everything from scratch. I had to reclaim my life, my happiness, my peace. I had spent so many years living in the shadow of my family's dysfunction that I had forgotten who I was. But I was finding myself again. I was learning to take control of my own life. Not just the finances, not just the trust, but everything. I was learning to stand up for myself, to stop being the one who always cleaned up everyone's messes. I wasn't a doormat anymore. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had a voice, and I was going to use it. I remember the first time I sat down in my apartment, the sun streaming through the windows, and I felt peaceful. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The peace in my home was mine. It wasn't the fake, fragile peace I had tried to maintain for my family. It was mine, and I had earned it. I opened the fridge, the light flickering on, and saw that it was stocked with fresh produce, healthy food. There was no expired milk, no half-eaten cakes. It was a small thing, but it was a symbol of everything I had reclaimed. I had created a life for myself that wasn't tied to the chaos of my family. And for the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't just about the money or the trust or the things I had given up. It was about something bigger. It was about realizing that I didn't need to be the one who held everything together for everyone else. I didn't need to sacrifice my happiness to protect them. And when I looked at Vanessa, when I saw her trying to rebuild her own life, I realized something important. We weren't the same people anymore. We had both changed. We had both grown. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild our relationship, but it would be different. It would be on my terms, not on the terms of the family that had taken me for granted for so long. I could finally breathe again. I could finally live for myself. And that was the lesson I had learned through everything. The lesson about taking control of my own life, about not letting anyone dictate my worth or my future. I'd protected the family legacy for so long, but now I was protecting myself. And that made all the difference. Well, that's the story. It's been a crazy ride. But the most important thing I've learned through all of this is that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if it means making some tough choices. It's not easy, but it's necessary for your own peace of mind. If you've ever felt like you've been stuck in a situation where you're always cleaning up everyone else's mess, just remember your peace matters too. You don't have to be anyone's doormat. Anyway, if you enjoyed hearing this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And you won't miss out on more stories like this one. Thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves.